Okay, let's go on and get started. It's a couple minutes after the top of the hour, and we are ready to rock and roll. I'm excited for today because today we finally get to stop talking about playing games and start playing some games and designing games and so forth, and that's got to be better than listening to a professor just talk at you, right? So, let's get back into it. If you think back to last Wednesday, we had a chance to kind of broach the topic of games and how we might use them specifically, or design them and adapt them specifically for use as an interpretive tool, because games tend to be highly engaging, and if for no other reason than the fact that some people just are naturally wired to get into whatever game is in front of them, that means it's a useful thing. Now, we don't want to use it in terms of modern marketing and the multi-billion-dollar, approaching trillion-dollar game industry in sort of a mercenary way, right? Like, if we ever get into the realm of downloadable content or DLC packs where you buy the rest of a game as they're finishing it, then we're doing something wrong, right? We've lost our way. We've lost sight of the fact that we're using games as a tool instead of as sort of the point. But I don't think we're in any immediate risk of turning into the next Bobby Kotick or Electronic Arts. Okay, so let's finish up talking about sort of the characteristics of what makes a game, and then we'll head outside and just start trying some things out. By the end of the class today, we'll have an assignment to essentially start developing one or a couple of game prototypes just to try out, just to see what it's like to design a game instead of just pick one up and use it as a player. All right, so we're halfway through talking about the characteristics, and one of those that I believe we left off on is the representative tokens and roles. So tokens are the things in the play space, the objects, and then the roles are for the people, the players, playing the game, or roles for agents in a game that are not players. We would call those NPCs, or non-player characters. Okay? So, in interpretation specifically, we want to plan for, and this is where we left off, plan for large, small, diverse, and even or odd numbers of players. Okay? This is pretty important. Some games just kind of break if most folks have to watch while two people and only two people play the game. That's much less interesting for everybody watching. Okay? This is a big one. The internal economy of a game is the flow of material, of points. It is the mechanisms by which you accumulate things, or you spend opportunities, or you spend points to get troops on your battlefield, or whatever. It's the economy, right? And you, as the interpreter, need to decide, do I have an infinite flow of resources? If the things that are flowing through the game are points, like I win some points this round, you win some points the next round, but they're all just imaginary points, so the point scores, the point accumulation can be in the millions or billions. It's just making it up, right? If you have physical tokens, then the logistics, kind of the overhead of carrying hundreds or thousands of small tokens gets to be pretty burdensome and expensive. So, you want to decide what best helps illustrate my topic, or this particular subtopic, the thematic point that I'm trying to use this game to get across. Is the flow of resources conditional? Typically it is, right? So, you get $200 in Monopoly when you do a certain thing, you trigger a certain event, like pass and go. You can also trade money to and from other players for other resources, like properties and so forth. And time is a resource as well. So if you've ever played a game where you've been forced to lose a turn, that is using time as a resource, or time as a proxy for the opportunity cost of losing the ability to enact your choices in the game. Okay? So the material economy is the most recognizable kind of economy. It's tokens in the game that represent houses and hotels in Monopoly. It is Vespine gas and whatever those crystals are in StarCraft. It's, the little piles of coins in Diablo. It's all of the things that look like what they represent in terms of the concept of the game's economy, right? So in the viral 2013 game Cookie Clicker, I just went to the Cookie Clicker website. It's still going, and it's now available on Steam. This came out when you guys were what, like 8, 9 years old, whenever that was, and it is still going strong. And it got millions and millions and millions of players for a free game where the whole point of the game is to click a cookie, and that gives you a cookie. And then you start spending some of those cookies to hire grandmas to bake you more cookies. And eventually the grandmas can bake more cookies than you can click. And so it makes more sense to buy more grandmas so you can get more cookies, so you can reinvest in more grandmas, and then farms, and then cookie mines, and then cookie factories, and I think like eventually you get like quantum singularity, and you can make cookies to the tune of decillions of cookies per second, because it's fun, it's goofy, and it's this funny storyline about the grandmas sort of ascending to this new plane and merging with Cthulhu and causing the apocalypse. It's a darling game, and it's all just around the elaborated metaphor of baking cookies. And you literally just click a cookie to start, okay? So, in games like XCOM or tactical squad games, you have an action economy. You're not trading any money in that or anything like that. It's just you can do a certain number of things per round, and you have typically a limited number of rounds before the objective gets away, or the objective overwhelms you and kills all your squad mates, or whatever, okay? So, in games like Gloomhaven, for example, the action economy is very, very tightly tuned. And gosh, that game made millions and millions of dollars on Kickstarter for basically taking Dungeons & Dragons, which is a very loose sort of floppy game design, and tightening it down into tight, tactical combat rounds. So, the internal economy is whatever you need it to be. Because it can take any shape, because it can have any tokens, it can have an infinite number of those things, you have to make some decisions on what do I need my game economy to be. And usually you're putting constraints on that economy. If it's just open-ended forever, then there's no clear end to the game. And we know from last week that we need a good, clear victory condition so that folks know what they're working towards or playing towards, okay? So, feel free to tweak or fine-tune these things. And you can do the tweaking or fine-tuning as people are playing the game. Like if some of your players are getting stuck on a riddle that's in your game, or some kind of a skill challenge that's in your game, you can modify that riddle or skill challenge, change the answer before they figure it out to make it easier for them if you need to help folks along, or you can put additional challenges in people's progress to sort of tune the difficulty up to that sort of cresting and riding that wave, that flow sensation. Okay. This is super important. The game doesn't run the experience. You run the game, which determines the experience. Got it? You're always in the driver's seat as the interpreter here. This is a little bit more complex with non-staff games, but we'll get the idea pretty fast. As soon as we start play testing each other's game ideas out here, in here, wherever, we're going to get a sense of, wow, people will try to, or even just unconsciously or accidentally, they'll find all the design limits that I didn't think about, and they're going to push against them hard just to see what happens, okay? If there was a way to make infinite money in Monopoly, somebody would have figured that out, just to try, you know? So, you upregulate, you downregulate, you emphasize, you explain, you correct, and steer folks back on track if they're getting way off in the weeds somewhere. So this is all under the category of interpreter leadership, right? You are captain of the ship. And little changes, little tweaks to add a little bit of friction, or add a meaningful challenge, or to smooth out a little bit of friction, make it easier for folks to sort of race ahead. This has a huge effect on how people feel as they're playing the game. So, you want to pay close attention, constantly monitoring, checking in with your players and your play testers in the design phase. And you use breakpoints like in between rounds. Or if you need to, call an emergency, sort of pause or all stop in the game. Say, everybody stop running around. Let's pick apart something that just happened that's really interesting and I don't want it just to get too far. Because the game is just a tool and you're using it to unfold some interesting and complex and engaging concept, it makes sense to look for those little breakpoints. Again, in between rounds or at the beginning of the game, at the end of the game, or significant milestones or events during a game. If the players level up somehow, or they unlock a treasure or reward, that's a great moment to not continue playing the game, but just pause for a second and say, hey, let's take a step out of the game here for a sec. What does this treasure really mean? What does this look like? It's not just a bunch of gold coins in a pirate chest. We're talking about XYZ, okay? And then back into the game and see if they can race to the finish and emerge victorious, okay? So, that looks like explaining to, reflecting with, or debriefing with, depending on sort of the timing of it and your need to help clarify things. So we've talked a little bit about flow, and this is a big concept in the outdoor recreation world. There's a researcher named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Don't ask me to spell that. It's got lots of consonants. But Csikszentmihalyi and affiliated researchers have been studying this sensation that people get when, if you're a instrument player, you're absolutely lost in the moment of that music. Typically, you're not playing something that's super easy for you, and you're not playing something that is beyond your skill level. You're right at, again, it's described as at the surfing the crest of the wave. A little bit more of a gnarly wave, and it'll break on top of you and eject you out of the experience. A little bit not intense enough, or challenging enough, or engaging enough, and you sort of slide off the back of the wave and back down, and you slow down, and you're laying down, paddling on your board again. Okay? So, flow is where you lose track of time. Flow is where you're completely engrossed in the thing. Flow is where you are learning a lot about the thing rapidly, developing skill rapidly. And people, once they have experienced flow in some activity, like in rock climbing, for example, you'll hear rock climbers describe solving a problem and feeling very zen as they do it. They might be hundreds of feet above the ground in a pretty exposed spot, but they're right there. The entire world sort of contracts down to that focus, that moment, that experience. And that moment might be hours or days long even. Okay? So, flow is a transitory thing, but flow is absolutely something that we can help induce in our participants. And to the extent that you've ever had, I'm probably not that lecturer, that professor, but if you've ever taken a class where at the end of that 50-minute session, you just sat there for a sec like, man, this talk today just completely exploded my cranium. I need a minute to pick the chunks off the floor and stuff them back in the head hole. You might have experienced flow. It's occasionally possible in a really, really good movie. Flow is absolutely possible to, with lots and lots more practice and skill development, it's possible to achieve that with someone. So, world-class competitive dancers, for example, report either being in flow when they're really in their thing, like Olympic level athlete kind of thing, or having experienced that, chasing it again for the rest of their lives. Flow is a very, very powerful thing. So, we want to look for chances to, even in like a brief little game for Interp, this could be one of your goals for the game, whether or not your players realize it or not. Okay? So, after an in-game achievement, that is, you have to progress the game. We've talked about progression, so that means expanding the premise of the game, changing it, adding an intensifier to make it a little bit harder and more complex, because now they've just got up to the top of the wave and you got to keep building just a little bit until that inevitable climax where the ending of the game is inevitable and the rest is just falling action. Okay? So, you can't stay where you're at, and games have built-in progression every time. So, Work with that, lean into that. So my PowerPoints are black and white, and they are sans serif for a low resolution projector display, and they're completely uninteresting. In fact, I rarely use images in them, so that they are accessible to the maximum number of students at any given time. Your game should not be like a lecture PowerPoint, because your game isn't about information transfer, okay? So, with games, you want to have a cohesive aesthetic. What's the color scheme in your game? Is it bright, vibrant, saturated colors? Is it sort of sepia toned and old-timey because it's relating to some historical event maybe, and so forth. So, any of you guys ever play a Red Dead Redemption or Red Dead Redemption 2? Video game players in the house? Okay. There's kind of this aesthetic or vibe or mood or colorway associated with that subtly reinforces the themes of the game, the mechanics of the game, and the setting of the game, the time and place and people involved or characters involved in it. Okay? So, we're mostly just going to be working on game prototypes in this class. But for our in-class examples here, the game should have a unifying motif where the tokens look like what they represent. And the roles are named like what they represent. They sound like what they represent, and it makes sense to the players. Okay? So, this is the game Camp, Travel Edition. And so the board is not an abstract board of squares or a racetrack style game as it's called. But there are trees, there's a deer, there's an owl, and there's a campfire, right? You are trying to, in the metaphor of the game, trying to get to camp. Get back to camp, and so forth. Okay? So, whatever your game is about, make it look like that. Cool? Choose the font. Anything but Comic Sans. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding, actually. But choose mechanics that make sense and that reinforce that unifying theme or presentation. What's this core of the game that it's all really about? Right? Every part of this should hang together with that. Now, again, that's tough to do with our in-game prototypes. They're going to be what are called paper prototypes. Very, very simple, generally pretty abstract. We don't have a whole team of professional artists. But we can, at least, with the naming of tokens and roles, have stuff that looks like what they represent. Okay? So, be consistent with the plot of your game. And what you are presenting is based around typically one of these. So, researcher Booker put together a list of 7 basic game plots. And here I've got a couple of examples not based out of games, but out of stories. But as every game has progression, every story has plot progression. There's some meaningful overlap here, right? So take down a couple of notes. And there's a chance that 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 of these 7 resonate fairly quickly with you. It's like, oh yeah, I like games in which I am battling some kind of monster. So typically this would be a player versus enemy kind of thing. Sports stories and games tend to follow a rags to riches plotline. The hero's journey is a whole semester worth of lectures on its own, but we want to understand that these very broad categories are something you want to pick fairly early on in your game design. And this helps you architect your progression, so you don't have to make a bunch of this, you don't have to make everything up from whole cloth. We'll talk about how to make comedy and jokes and humor appropriately and effectively with Ralph Koster's, Ralph Koster was the theory of fun. There is a theory of humor as well, like what makes things funny to human beings. And it's It's pretty robust. It works okay. Okay. So, rebirth stories, rebirth games. If you have ever played Pokemon and you've evolved your Pokemons, this is a very, very recognizable and satisfying thing. Everybody would love a second chance. And so the ability to access that sensation through gameplay is a very powerful one. Okay? And so on and so forth. Again, the hero's journey is a huge thing, but think Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, or any of the classical heroes of antiquity, all the way back to Gilgamesh, thousands and thousands of years ago, Beowulf, and so on forward through time. So the hero's journey is basically summed up as there's just a regular person in the regular mundane world. And they're going about their regular mundane life when all of a sudden something happens. And often that something happening is the villain of the story perpetrating their will on not just the hero, but kind of everybody in a way that nobody can ignore, right? So Darth Vader gets to command the massive fleet of Star Destroyers and the Death Star, spoiler alert, and so forth. And Luke Skywalker is just chilling on Tatooine, a backwards desert planet that everyone has forgotten. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi shows up and says, hey, buddy, there's this whole other bigger world out there, and, you know, there's something for you to do in it. So that's Gandalf talking to Bilbo, and Gandalf talking to Frodo in the Lord of the Rings series. It is the kids in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe finding the wardrobe and going to Narnia from a place that is misinterpreted as Spare And so the hero reluctantly says, you know what? I'd rather not. I'm just going to sit back and let this one mellow for a little while. Luke returns to Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. And then they get blasted by stormtroopers and just fricasseed like skeletons in front of their house, all blackened and charred. And the reluctant hero can't ignore the violence, the evil that is happening in the wider world beyond. So they go out and they face a series of challenges. They have to acquire specific things. Remember, it's just a backwoods, mundane person thrust into a heroic journey. So, Luke trains with Yoda. The kids in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe receive gifts, magical gifts from Aslan, the sort of lion savior figure of that storyline. Gandalf invites Bilbo along on the journey, and he fairly quickly picks up a magic ring, which is seemingly innocuous. Nothing could possibly go wrong with it, right? And so on and so forth. And the hero tries to fix the problem and fails. In a lot of these stories, the hero literally dies trying to solve the problem, defeat the supervillain, what have you. But the hero experiences either a symbolic or literal resurrection, depending on the story. So the Matrix series is very literally a hero's journey, for example, with Neo's resurrection. And sort of right before that resurrection happens, the hero, usually in the clutches of the villain as they're about to get ganked by the villain, they learn something. They learn that their initial approach was flawed. Their initial approach was naive. They learn maybe that the supervillain has a weakness. Typically overarching pride or ambition or something like that, and they're overextended. And so the hero, typically with the help of a bunch of friends, like lovable rogues like Han Solo or Pippin and Merry and the rest of the Fellowship of the Ring and so forth, they all do their thing. And multiple plots side by side, but the hero takes that insight they get and they use it to ultimately defeat the final enemy. But the hero's journey isn't over. They have to take what they've learned, take what they've claimed from the bad guy, taken over as the bad guy's bleeding out or whatever, or collapsing down on the ground like Sauron does. They have to take that back to the mundane world and bring it to everybody else. So, Neo at the end of The Matrix. Everybody returning to the Shire at the end of that trilogy of books, and so on and so forth. And life can never be the same because the hero, they're not that backwards kid that left originally, even though everybody else is still there just doing regular stuff. The hero's been changed irrevocably. The world has changed irrevocably, and the hero did the changing to the world. Now brings that back to the mundane world and changes that too. Brings back what is the insight, the magical artifact, the whatever that transforms everything at least a little bit going forward for everybody, all the regular folks. And then we can finally get to the happily ever after. Okay? So that's a super short version of the hero's journey. If you're interested in storytelling at all, look up the hero's journey. It's fascinating. How many of like the top 100 movies follow that? And how many of our different religions, mythologies, and so forth that have hero figures sort of map onto this as well. This is deeply, deeply, deeply recognizable to everybody. Everybody. And we keep buying movie tickets to watch this stuff. Okay? So, hero's journey is a big one. Hero's journey is a tough one for a 3 to 5 minute interpretive game. But for any particular topic where this is appropriate, it's a very, very powerful. Okay? Very powerful. This resonates strongly with a lot of people. Done right. Cool. All right. So let's start putting it all together as we sort of wrap up all of this talking about games so we can play some games. So you want to identify that favorite moment. What's the aha moment? What's the climax of the game? What is that sort of moment or instance or mechanic where everything comes to a head and just explodes the rest of the progress, and that's the end of the game? What's the emotion that comes out of that moment? What's the emotion that you want as the game designer to come out of that moment? Identify that emotion, then build the themes, the storyline, the progression, the rules, the mechanics, the aesthetic, all of the stuff we've just finished talking about Wednesday and today. Put it all together into a game. And we'll have some time to test it out and so forth. Then you play the game and trigger that emotional sensation in your players. And that emotional sensation gets attached to the point, the meaning, the wisdom, the insight that you're trying to use the game to get at. Okay? We learn things in pairs. We don't learn facts. We remember how we feel about the fact. Does that make sense? Okay. So, if you have any hard classes, learn to use that paired memory formation mechanic to your advantage. Okay? We remember how we feel about things that we learn. Not so much just learning. Okay? Cool. All right. So, let's start working on this stuff. With our game design exercise, this is going to be a team assignment for the rest of the class today. We've got about 45 minutes left, 40 minutes. And we're going to pair off to start because taking a class session and a half to talk through this stuff, it's kind of a lot to sort of pick up for the first time. So we're going to scaffold that by working in pairs. We've got 6 people, so it works pretty well. Look around, find a buddy in the class, and do 4 Wednesdays class. I want you to put together at least one game prototype for each of you. Okay. Cool. So, again, each of you picks your own topic and brainstorm with the other person. here for the next 40 or so minutes, and we can start play testing these on Wednesday, weather permitting and so forth. So for the purposes of interpretation, we want to develop games that might be pretty interesting outside on the hook. Rainy days happen, so think about maybe a game instead, or maybe an adaptation of the outdoor game that's totally playable inside in a room like this, where there's not a lot of space to run around, and so forth. Okay. And you can think about instead a non-stat game. So something that might show up in like a Junior Ranger guidebook, or like a one-pager on the Junior Ranger guidebook. Could be as simple as a crossword puzzle, right? That's the kind of game. Or a word search or something like that. Drinking game adaptations, super recognizable. They just don't translate well when sober, right? And sometimes parents get a little bit mad when you're teaching their kids how to play. It's not beer pong, it's grass carp pong, because grass carp are interesting and fun to fish for. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, so generally don't go for the drinking games. Like, they are valid games, and they work, but they're just not as fun as games that are designed to be played sober, as most of our participants will generally be sober. We don't want to make any assumptions, but generally speaking, you never know. All right? Cool. So, here's a bit of a reminder or a refresher on this. For your game design brief, see if you can accomplish the entire game design in 1 page or less. Right? So we talked about on Wednesday, here's back to your notes or to your memory, on how many sentences do we generally get in this class to explain rules and mechanics? 3. Yeah. Nice, easy number to remember. It's not too many words to hold in working memory. Okay? For everybody who hasn't ever played a game before. So, go for a 1-pager, even a half-pager works just fine. If it's a very clearly recognizable game, sometimes a good game design has the instructions baked right in and you don't have to say it in words up at the top, right? So if there's a word find, it can be about 1 sentence or even just a long phrase on what to do. And then the rest of the whole page is the content for that. Because we are not working at game design as a career, we're working at interpretation and using game design. We are free to use things like crossword generators online. There's a billion game generators online for games of different types. Okay? So, if you really get busy this week, maybe with early midterms or something, and you kind of got to phone it in, go with that. But if you're curious to try this stuff out, see what you think about designing a game from scratch, like a board game or a card game or a dice game. And prove that anything can be turned into a game, or at least gamified. We could play a game right now if you wanted to. We don't have to. We can play a game right now. All of those helping verbs we're supposed to avoid. Yes, your professor for science went to a specialty dice manufacturer website and found helping verb dice. Passive voice. So see if you can say a sentence without the word would in it. Right? So gamification can be that easy and quick. And every once in a while there'll be somebody in the crowd who's ready to dork out about linguistics games or whatever, right? And that person, God, and everybody else is like, oh God, that is. Okay? So, go ahead and pair up with anybody you want to in class. And let's work on putting together a 1-pager brief on the game. Okay? We'll come back to this in a little bit more detail on Wednesday and start planning prototypes and so forth. But for today, it's just enough to take anything out of your outline as maybe one of those thematic points or the content areas within your topic and start to fit a game to it. Cool? All right. I'll be kind of floating around, bouncing ideas with you if you would like. Otherwise, I can just kind of buzz off and try to not stare, you know. but ask each other questions, throw out a bunch of ideas, see what sticks. Okay. Cool. All right, let's get after it. This is our thing for today.
Simplest
a little bit more Yes, that's why I think. Yes, yeah. I would do that. I guess. But I feel like someone's attacking that.
I'm just thinking
You have to fix
perfect.
everything already. Exactly. I feel like you have
All right, so we have a question of, do you start with a topic and then figure out a game? Or do you start with a game that you really like and like figure out a topic to go to? In the context of interpretation, it's gotta be topic driving the game. Like you can't shoehorn, some random topic, trees or some historical event onto poker cards, right? It's like they don't have any immediate clear connection. But if you have that specific historic event in mind, what was a game that those folks played is one way to answer this question. Or what among those plots or progression types kind of feels like it's the closest to that historic event. Right? So for a game, interpretation of like, I don't know, it could be the World War II battles, kind of how modern wargaming got started, and what led to the development of things like Dungeons and Dragons was German military simulations that were originally like thousands of people running around on the ground and people running back and forth like transferring orders and stuff, and it's essentially practice for officers issuing orders in a strategic way. And then it was a million times easier to not have 1,000 people running around, just have like little pips on the board running around, and so forth. So in that case, you would pick up, if you were interpreting like a Civil War battle or something like that, maybe a game that simulates two different orders of battle sort of crashing against each other, like chess, for example, but maybe not actually chess. Maybe with modified pieces. Instead of rooks, you have cannons, and instead of knights, you have those cavalry units or something like that, right? We want to make those tokens and rolls representative to the thing that you're interpreting, not the other way around. That's a really good question. So I wanted to open that up. Great question. I'm not saying that on poker cards. If that's a useful thing, use them. But make sure it's what you want. They're helpful for dice, right? I'll just leave those there for
Yeah.
Is this for yeah, and so over like today and the next couple of days, come up with at least one game prototype per person, so that you're not like changing somebody else's idea that's not really interesting to you, or that way everybody can help play. It's not just everybody gets together. Sound good? All right, so feel free to lean into your outlines as far as you have them developed and so forth, right? We've already put a little bit of work into that. Might as well put that to good use.
talking about
one of the things that
invasive species.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's a lot to do there.
East Forge and that's my
pay a lot of money.
So the idea of maybe possibly like a one versus everyone else sort of thing, the one being, because usually in those type of games, the one would have an upper hand, like an invasive species would.
So nice to meet you.
Yeah, exactly. With something like that, or even like something like that.
And then we're just not sure.
Okay. So usually it's so the general topic would be maybe invasive species, right? And then within that, more specific or the actual thematic point is going to be something like some specific perspective
Or something like
or
that. But
Well,
also,
we wanted to
like,
just use a lot of that.
we wanted to show off how fast it is.
Okay.
But, you know, I don't know if it's
Yeah, no, it can totally work.
I mean, it could, but it's just, I don't know.
All right, so invasive colonization is exponential math. So in the simplest form, you could do a game of Delta where, let's say, it's probably pretty fun if that's the vibe one you would have. It's fun to be the invasive sort of patient zero.
Like sharks.
Yeah.
That's
Like it feels good because, you know, first round you got 1, next round you got 2, next round you got 3, 4, next round after that you got 8, next round after that you got 16, right? And on up and up and up. And pretty quick, you know, your 5x5 board done in less than 5 rounds. You know, like you've completely taken over the whole thing. It's a pretty clear object. Listen, wow. I can't lose. It's free real estate, baby. You know? Or if you want a more sort of desperation type gameplay, give the player the role of the native species, trying to do whatever you can in the face of that exponential curve. Right? So anything you could do as like a successful competition strategy as a native species. Or maybe you're playing as the forester, plant biologist, you know. And you got X squares on the game board you can clear out with the camp clearing. Y number of squares you can clear out with fire that round. Z number of squares you can clean up with herbicide, something like that. And you know, if you don't get on top of it right away, it might get away from you. You know? So maybe you have to like flip over the poker cards or something, and anything over a 5 is invasive. You can only flip over so many cards per turn, and make a choice on how to nuke them. It's the only way to be sure, or you know, or whatever, right? So use in a game on something like this, I would suggest using something like exponential like double compound interest math. There's no force more powerful in the universe than that. He's a pretty smart guy. 165. So there you go. Yeah, does that help at all? Alright. You guys have plenty of choices. And you don't have to take anything I'm saying. It's just suggestions. So think about it. Also remember you're each going for the design. So take this one, set it down, start working on another one, let it give you some ideas of the first one, come back to it, and then play one with the other.
I did. Thinking like maybe there'd be like some foundation or something.
Could do that. That would be an easy one to have like piece, huge piece of paper you can say you have one person that's a mom and that's the conversation. Or and they take one spot from one person. And they bring out a question out. Pick a piece of mom that correlates to certain numbers or something. And then it goes on and on and on. And then you bring in maybe the one person
Like a whole day, yeah.
and the same way going. I don't know. Just like doing that and then using someone who was alright, this is gonna have to channel. Same piece.
I'll move forward when you answer your question right. And we're back now. Unless that's the message.
Is that great? See them also.
So I was gonna do like the Simon Says kind of game. It's like kind of based off of this game called like
I don't know. I'd have to think more about it. That's
Exactly, but it's just
It's a good start.
So if you want to do it with
like
people,
commanding you to like do a bunch of
because
different
it doesn't have to
things,
be
and then you have to like try and follow like what they're saying. Because like trying to choose like a culture where you're not like. So I was gonna like do something like that in like setting up for a student system, like trying. But like the only problem is like this game doesn't have any order, and there's like kind of an order. Because I was like, because I thought of like two different things. Like, so in the original game, there's one called Shark Attack, where people who have gotten out can get back in and get other people out. So I was like, I could do a wildfire.
Yeah,
So they're
wildfire.
like fire
Yeah.
to destroy. But then I was like, yeah. But then I was thinking, well then I can't say, like do one of somebody like chopping down a tree, because you're probably not gonna chop down a tree right after the fire.
I was thinking like
Maybe that's
a board or something, or some of like cardboard board. Have like plastic marble, like some kind of bead or something. And then have like an end thing with like maybe a flower or like obstacles in the middle or something. And like take turns like blowing at it.
Yeah, I was
Let's
just
say
trying
it's
to
like
find like
following
how to
around.
like put order into it.
Maybe just demonstrate like how like hard it is for like one formation to take place, or like how like basically something like that. Like some have something like that. Maybe.
Some games do over the course of the same day. Games build models of the life of some species in the forest ecosystem. And what you play the game from the perspective of that species. But you're also encountering other ecosystem members and the roles and functions of the ecosystem. Yeah, use the game to illustrate its ecosystem adaptation. It forest ecosystems awesome.
We won't be playing our own games, right?
Huh?
Are we playing our own games, or is it?
Yeah.
What if it's
Well,
like
if you're facilitating it, if
Right.
you're the interpreter, then yes, most games don't have the interpreter as a player, except for very simple games where you can still maintain that situational awareness because you're in charge of people's safety. Right? You can't be so wrapped up in the game as the facilitator that anybody can do anything that is either physically or intellectually, spiritually, or emotionally harmful, right? Games are literally anything that you need them to be as the interpreter. So you would like what you would do. Sorry, not endogenous and exogenous. I was thinking forest ecosystems. What I meant to say were diegetic and exegetic. Much better terms. Alright. Diegetic is from within the premise of the setting or story. Exegetic is from without. You don't need to know those vocab terms unless you want to geek out on them later. Alright, so make some notes to yourself. Talk it out with your partner. And is anybody at a spot where you could like almost but not quite play it because you don't have any of the tokens? But you kinda got the idea? Alright. So would anyone like to talk us through your game design? Alright, cool. So I'll turn our attention.
I'm just gonna do one where either it's taped on your back or forehead. There's gonna be an image of an instrument, and you have to just ask people what questions about what it is. Find out what's on your head or back.
Okay, pretty straightforward. Everybody can see this in your mind's eye. It costs however much note cards cost to set up, right? So this is probably pretty sustainable as a game design. And you can scale it to an even or odd number of players. You can resort the cards into like super easy stack, moderate stack, ghost pepper spicy stack of like instruments that you've gotta be a Zydeco enthusiast that you have heard of before. And go from there, right? Super flexible. What's the emotional core beat that this is built around? What do you want the players to feel as part of the game? And this is not any kind of a trick question for anybody here, right? This is just, do I want my players to be sort of generally excited in this game, or like generally perplexed, or
Probably like confused and excited.
confused and excited? All right, cool. Sounds good. I spend a large amount of my time confused, hopefully excited as well. All right, so that works, right? You have this thing. It's on my own forehead, and I would like to know what it is. Either to get it off my forehead and get out of public scrutiny in a mixed group setting, or some people want to ham it up and kind of be the center of attention. All right, so everybody tell me. Let me ask you questions and so forth, right? So either way, people are excited to advance the game from the initial state to that victory position, figuring it out. Okay, all right, I'm off the hook. Put me back into the wallpaper. Good. Or yes, found it. Euro. I rock. Man, I'm so smart about these emotions. Alright, that's cool. So this is kind of how this goes, right? So topic. How I want my players to feel engaging with this topic, and then there's the rules and mechanics that get us there as the players as well. Okay. All right. That's all it is, right? That's A+ progress for where we're at right now. Perfect. Anybody else? Thanks, chat.
I'm trying to do like a guess who type game, but with the tools used in forestry. So like
just can't get there, right? We want to have something to help that person through. So, card games use wild cards, right? Aces and eights are wild, for example. That helps solve a problem, or just resources you don't got in that game of Texas Hold'em, poker, or whatever. So think about what kinds of things you could sort of furnish to your players low-key to help get them unstuck without feeling like you're just handing them the victory. Right? That's not a satisfying end of the game. It's just like, okay, let me tell you the answer that you could never have guessed. It's not much of a game for me. So think about for each of your designs, what could I do, again, to sort of modify the game on the fly, to increase the difficulty, to decrease it, to ratchet up the energy level, to sort of down-regulate it, to make it more smooth, mellow, and chill, and relaxed, that kind of thing. It can be as simple as your facial expression, high energy, or super sedate. Right? Or it could be as explicit as roles and tokens, game mechanics that modify the game in a formal and recognizable way. Okay? So you got lots of options on these games. Cool. Any other questions? All right. We got about 5 minutes left. Anybody got another idea you'd like to put out for the group? We can talk about it. Ideate a little bit before we head out. Write these up as one-pagers for Wednesday. All right, cool. Let's go from here. See you on Wednesday. Let's dismiss a little bit early if you like. I'm around for questions, or if you want to throw around some ideas for your game. On your way out, take a look at these board games up here. You'll get a real clear sense immediately of kind of the style and tone and message of the game, even just glancing at it, looking at what the tokens and game order style like. Okay. Cool. With that, good to go. See you on Wednesday. Bring me back a one pager.
For something you're working on.
And for your ideas for interpreting trees on the tree hike from last week, I'll put up a course, like Dropbox, and link it on the front page. So you can some from last week. See you Wednesday. Thanks very much. Sorry I didn't get outside of play, but Wednesday, just plan on playing your game, okay? So if it needs tokens or whatever, just bring in some cheap tokens. Yes. Yeah, man, that was a good move.
Well, I don't want to like be like, oh yeah, I can totally come, and then they like schedule me on Sunday. I'm like,
Ah,
you know.
yeah,
Now I'm good.
I gotcha.